morning, uh, esteemed guests, audience, distinguished panelists. On the sideline of COP27 Sharm el-Sheikh and on behalf of Commercial International Bank Egypt, I would like to welcome you all to the fifth session out of a series of 5 panels introduced by CIB to COP27. Our topic today is very special. While all COP's narratives center on negotiations and manifestations, our topic today addresses the foundation. The title is Education for Sustainable Development. And the core question is, does our global educational system serve sustainable development goals? According to latest reports, the SDGs are not progressing. At least they are not progressing fast enough to meet the current challenges. As a case in point, humanity is witnessing the 5 warmest years on record in human history. So we are not on track. And this gets us to inquire about if education is fit for purpose. I'm going to share with you a cartoon that I had to design to express the fact that although the whole global system is moving ahead with new concepts, new SDGs, the fact is that the foundation, which are the legs, accounting and education, are not fit for new concepts. The business models are still archaic, and it's very much a question or a function of education and accounting practice. And this will be the core of our discussion. This is COP number 27. So 27 rounds of global interaction and momentum, and we are where we are today. This brings me to share with you a report, a seminal report that was issued 50 years ago in 1972. A team of MIT researchers led by the late Dr. Donella Meadows. They were commissioned by the Club of Rome to make a study about growth patterns and the future of humanity. And they came with this very important report in 1972 titled The Limits to Growth. And the main argument was, if humanity continues with the same pattern of consumption and production, we will reach zero growth in 100 years. Why? Because the Earth has a biocapacity. And if you multiply population growth by technology, technological power, and consumption patterns, we are consuming 1.7 Earth currently as we speak. We are indebted to our ecological systems. In 1900, the global population was 1.7 billion. Now we are 8 billion. Multiply this with the technological power, multiply this with the consumption patterns, we cannot sustain our growth. Numerically, our Earth, our system cannot support this level of growth. And in hindsight, I would say the research or the report, The Limits to Growth, was optimistic because we reached almost sluggish growth in 50 years, not in 100 years. So let's examine where we are today. We are facing a plethora of crises. We're facing financial crisis that did not end since 2008. It keeps on unloading. We're facing an economic crisis. We're facing an environmental crisis, a geopolitical crisis, a poverty crisis, an energy crisis. The main problem is that we tend to perceive these crises as independent, as isolated. And we do not see that they are interrelated, that environmental crisis would lead to a poverty crisis, would lead to an economic crisis, and vice versa. Actually, they are all interrelated, and the real crisis is a crisis of a mindset that got us to perceive growth in purely materialistic terms, in GDP for nations, in profit terms for corporates. This didn't get us anywhere. We are not growing economically, and we are facing environmental challenge and climate crisis that are critical to survival of the human race. This being said, I would say it's a crisis of a mindset. It's a crisis of a value system that read growth in purely financial or material terms. And in our growth formula, we were not sensitive to the environment. We were not sensitive to the society. We did not see that we are part of a whole ecosystem. So it's a crisis of education. And actually, that was the concluding statement when I read a book 10 years ago uh, titled Earth in Mind. It was a very inspiring book, and it led me to decipher or to frame the real problem. It's a problem, crisis of education. The book Earth in Mind was written by Professor Dr. David Orr. This book was very inspiring, left its mark on me ever since. And when I was preparing for this panel, I thought to reach out for Dr. David Orr, who is in San Francisco, and he was gracious enough that he accepted the invitation, although he is now on the West Coast, different time zone. It's 2 a.m. after midnight. So I welcome Dr. David Orr. Dr. David Orr is John Paul Sears Professor of Environment and Politics, College of Oberlin. He's also James March Professor at Large of University of Vermont. He is the author of 8 books, and he has been awarded 8 honorary degrees. We are honored to have you with us, Dr. David. You inspired me a lot, and I'm sure I think it's a quite significant thing that a book you wrote 1994 will be resonated and echoed in COP27 at Sharm el-Sheikh, and hopefully it will lead to real change on ground. So I welcome you all on behalf of the audience. We applaud Dr. David Orr. And over to you. We would like to go through your presentation and slides and share with us your experience. Why did you write this book and what happened ever since?
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I wish I could be with you. Can you hear me all right? Are you hearing me clearly?
Yes. Yes.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss this. And after your introduction, there's not really much more I can say. But if I can, I'd like to share the screen and offer some slides. And do I do that here? Kind of share my screen. The typically education is regarded as a side affair and not central to the human condition. And I think the motivation behind the panel and behind the work that I do is that education really is central to everything that we do. Next slide. The outline of what I would like to do is on the screen. I'd like to say 4 things. One is I'd like to describe what's being called the long emergency. There's nothing about climate change that can be solved quickly. And I'd like, as that wonderful introduction said, I'd like to trace this back to the way we think and how poorly we think about many things. And thirdly, I'd like to discuss systemic change. The word systems, I think, is the most radical word in any language, however translated in any language. It implies that we're interrelated and have mutual obligations, and also to a farther future. And then at the end, I'd like to talk about politics and truth, and I'll be very brief and very quick. Next slide, please. So the first is simply 3 slides that describe where we are. And the next slide, yes, that's fine. Advance. This is the carbon budget, and if the slide is activated, you'll see that this line comes down all the way around here, and we're now somewhere here. This is not being activated. I'm not sure why, but in 1851 we didn't have a problem. By the time we get to 2022, this gap for carbon emissions is very close to crossing a commitment to 1.5 degrees centigrade warming. Next slide. This is a composite of everything here is drives everything over here. This is all those things, the climate change and methane and nitric oxides and so forth. This is all the things that we do, our politics, our economics, and so forth. But the point of the slide is this drives this. And Adam Tooze, who is a economic historian at Columbia University, coined the word polycrisis. It's not one thing; it's a whole series of interacting things. It's a crisis of crises. Next slide. This was the third slide here is simply if you were on an airliner and you had a dashboard of where you are at altitude and airspeed and so forth, if the equivalent of that was this slide for Earth systems, we're now in danger with this system and with climate change. And this is a little bit, this came out of the Potsdam Institute, but everything has moved a little further out and some things are beyond control here. But climate change, which is the focus of COP27, which affects all of these other things, is moving further and further from control. And I think the great fear is that we're trending toward a runaway crisis. Next slide. So I want to transition to the crisis of mind. None of that happened. None of this polycrisis or the climate change crisis happened because of poor people or people who were uneducated. It happened, it's largely driven by people who are highly educated and with degrees from some of the best institutions around. Next slide. The point of this, as was said in the introduction, is that all of those, the left side of that previous slide of the polycrisis reflects a prior disorder of how we think, our perceptions and values. And that makes it a crisis of education, but it's not so much of education as it is, probably not in education, but a crisis of education. The whole system of how we learn and how we carve up reality into disciplines and different departments. Next slide. This thing called environmental education is very typically a small department in a large university that has lots of other things going on. But the point of the slide is simply to say that what we include or what we exclude, we're part of or apart from nature. So it ought to be infused throughout the entire curriculum in all sorts of ways. And I think that actually is happening. Not fast enough, but I think it is happening. Next slide. So the point of the work that I'm involved with Colorado universities in the United States and Arizona State University and others is to change curriculum so that all students graduate knowing what planet they're living on and how that planet works as a physical system. And then the basic principles of democracy and good governance, which are central, as we know, at COP27. And that they're citizens of two different kinds of systems. One is an ecological system, one is a civic community, and they are fundamentally related. Then I added here the principles of ecological design, which apply as much to architecture and agriculture and banking and commerce and economics as anything else. And the good news here is that we know fundamentally how to design and build a world that stays within the boundaries of nature. Next slide. One of the ways that this education can happen, this is the Adam Joseph Lewis Center, which was a building that we did on the Oberlin College campus in the late 1990s. It is entirely solar powered. This part of the building is a wastewater treatment facility. It looks like a greenhouse, but this was the first entirely solar powered building on a U.S. college campus. We've since done a hotel, which is similarly hotel and conference center, which is similarly powered entirely by sunshine. But this building being done by students and working with a team of architects that included NASA and a number of architectural and engineering firms, was designed around the principle of causing no ugliness, human or ecological, somewhere else or at some later time. And it was, it's won a number of awards, but it's a small building. It's 14,200 square feet. My point is this, that one way to teach interrelatedness is through architectural design. So schools, colleges, universities ought to be designed with nature in mind, as part of the landscape and powered by sunshine and emitting no waste. And those things should be built into the curriculum so that students graduate understanding how to make their presence in the world in much better ways. Next slide. These are two of the books that came out of the project. Design on the Edge, published by MIT Press, was the story of it. And these are essays that relate to the larger problem of design. Next slide. I want to go back to this word systems for a minute. Next slide. The crisis that we face, this poly crisis, is one of systems. It's the interrelatedness of the world. And so we have to deal with it as a systemic crisis. As was said in that wonderful introduction, we carve up the world and we keep these things separate, but in fact, the banking world and the commerce world and economies and the agricultural systems and so forth, they're all linked as one very large system of human behavior and human activity. Next slide. The literature on systems is extensive, and these in the English language are some of the titles I found most important. Danilo Meadows, who passed away way too early in her life, but before she passed away, she wrote a manuscript called Thinking in Systems. She was one of the co-authors of the Limits to Growth report that was referred to. But I think the word system is the most radical word in any language, because it implies that we are so interrelated and have obligations with each other and also to future generations. Next slide. The system's goal, I think, in education is to identify these things, the patterns that connect us, and understanding how systems actually work and feedback loops. Right now with climate, we're facing a large number of positive feedback loops that will emerge over time, but methane being released from seabeds and from melting boreal forest soils and so forth. The non-linearity of the system. This is one of the things that the authors of the Limits to Growth in 1972 stressed. There's surprises and there are branch points and break points in systems. And there are counterintuitive things, the things that we wouldn't predict by simply thinking of the world as linear. And then there are these long time horizons. And the fact is that with climate change, carbon stays in the atmosphere for a very long time. So the effects of the carbon that we released in flying airplanes and driving cars and heating buildings and so forth, that carbon stays in the atmosphere for hundreds to thousands of years. Next slide. Now, one of the points I'd like to make here is that if you design a system for maximum economic growth, the predictable results are global warming, species extinction, inequality, racism, conflict and war, and so forth. There just are very few accidents, only the working out of the rules of a system. And so climate change is a predictable result of the way we've organized an economy and what we value and what we don't value. Next slide. So we pay, another way to say this is that we pay for sustainable development, whether we get it or not. And we pay in other currencies of war, crime, poverty, disease, shortened lives, human-caused disasters, lost human potentials, and injustice, and so forth. You can make a long list of how we actually pay for climate change or the failure to move to sustainability. Next slide. I want to end with some comments about politics and what is going on at COP27. Next slide. Politics is typically defined as who gets what, when, and how. But the what here includes all of these things that are basically environmental aspects. But this means that the ecosphere and efforts to protect it are fundamentally political, as are the efforts toward development. Next slide. This, for us, creates a problem. And one of the difficulties, we're at COP because of political failures. What is happening at COP27 is largely a remedial kind of thing as we try to understand how this came about and what we can do about it. Amitav Ghosh, the great writer in the book Great Derangement, says that the political structures of our time are incapable of confronting this crisis on their own. It may be that climate change represents in its very nature an unsolvable problem for modern nations in terms of their biopolitical mission. And by this, I think he's referring to the need for constant growth and with it the practices of governance that are associated with it. So one of the things that is on the agenda for the work I do is to begin to understand how we calibrate or relate the way we do the public business in government and through the economy with how the earth works as a physical system and overcome this, what Ghosh is calling the great derangement. Next slide. In COP27, there are, by one account, 636 fossil fuel lobbyists registered. And they're there to protect their investments and their companies' investments in oil and gas and coal and refining and all the things that use fossil fuels. This is that biopolitical problem that was referred to by Ghosh in the previous slide. This is what we have to overcome, and taking money out of fossil fuels and investing it in renewable energy and sustainable farming and regenerative practices on the land. But we need to change this biopolitical mission, organized and funded and built on a framework or scaffolding of fossil fuels. Next slide. And this gets into the issue of equity. Oxfam published a report called The Carbon Billionaires. And this is very telling because it identifies that a large part of the problem of climate change is rooted in inequity. And I don't see personally any way to get to sustainability without addressing inequity, both in terms of the amount of money that we have and the amount of carbon that individuals can burn. So this 3.1 million tons of carbon dioxide measured in equivalent units per billionaire is drastically larger than what is available to most people, which is down here 2.76 tons is average for people around the world. Next slide. Pope Francis in Laudato Si points out that what he calls an integral ecology must also include governance and the establishment of a legal framework which can set boundaries and so forth. But we've come to a point in human affairs where we have to rethink how we do the public business. And time is not on our side. The one slide that I had in the beginning that didn't activate, but the slide shows how little time we have before we cross fundamental thresholds. Some people believe we've already crossed them. In some ways we have. But this is what Bill McKibben refers to as a timed test. We don't have a lot of time to make major changes. Next slide. William Barber, a Christian minister in the United States, said at a conference we organized a few years ago that our ideas are too puny for our circumstances. This is the time for everybody in the room, everybody at COP27, everybody at a college or university, all of us around the world to come up with large ideas and understand what changes we have to make and how we best make them. Next slide. This is, you can make your own list, but the ideas of justice, decency, mercy, compassion, democracy, freedom by discipline, by equality, foresight, steward. This is a long list of large ideas. What our problem is not fundamentally one of technology, although it's certainly part of the solution. It's the largeness of our ideas. Next slide. Greta Thunberg put it this way: tell the truth. And she and young people all around the world are leading the effort to make sure that they have a future on a planet worth living in. Next slide. Coming down to the last couple of things, the prices that we charge for things don't typically include the full cost we impose on that next generation, on the poor, the vulnerable, and our grandchildren and so forth. So one of the major things that you all in the business and financial and banking industry can do is help support accurate pricing. The price of carbon clearly is way too cheap for what it really does cost. But the same could be said of many, many other things. So the point of this transition, it boiled down to the simplest term, is that our prices have to reflect the true cost. Next slide. This is what I mean by true cost. These people didn't cause climate change. This is Pakistan this past summer, when a third of the country was underwater, but they suffer because of it. And so countries like mine in the United States have to uh, do much, much, much better at sharing the burdens that we've imposed on the world by carbon that we've released historically. Next slide. Two last slides. This is by Albert Einstein. And I think to sum up, this is not just a matter of thinking. This is a matter of Einstein put it as compassion to understand that we are linked and related to this systems concept again, to all living creatures and the whole of nature and its beauty, and also to the long-term future prospect. And then finally, one more slide. I want to thank you for listening, and I appreciate so much the invitation to be a part of this. I wish I could be with you in presence there in Sharm el Sheikh. I wish you well in what you do. We're in this together. There's one humanity. We have to overcome our differences of politics and wealth and inequality and ethnicity. And so the challenge before us is large. I think I take great satisfaction believing it will overcome the crisis, this poly crisis that we face. And I thank you for your part in it. Thanks to all of you.
Dr. David, you never stop inspiring. As much as I was inspired 10 years ago by the book, I'm inspired by your presentation. And I think I need to frame 4 insights out of your presentation and share with the audience who are here or are joining us virtually. I think you mentioned it's a crisis of education and not a crisis in education. And this reminds me of another phrase. It's not a financial crisis that we faced back in 2008. It is finance in crisis, and they resonate. The second point that you mentioned is that our growth formula is unsustainable and that we are witnessing system failure that needs system transformation, that urges system thinking into our education. The third insightful comment is political structures are incapable of confronting the crisis of their own. And this brings me to COPs. The way they are structured. It's not about political negotiations. Climate is too much politicized and it will never be managed by political, narrow sighted interests. It's a global crisis. And that's why if COP is to succeed, and we hope COP27 will succeed, it's finance and education. It's finance, it's bankers, financial institutions, and the power of youth. And I believe in African youth. That's why it's from Africa to the world. The last insightful statement that resonates, and I remember reading it in your book, was the price. The price that we have right now in our system, it does not capture the environmental and social cost. This is not the true cost. We are not accounting for the environmental pollution or the social inequality in our price of goods or anything. And I think it's about time to make sure that we monetize, that our financial system and business models and our educational system teach us to account for and monetize the environmental and social benefits or losses. And this reminds me of a statement made by Einstein. Not sure it was just like that, but it says, not everything that we can count counts. And not everything that we cannot count does not count. We do not count for oxygen, but it counts. We do not count for well-being, but it counts. We do not count for the quality of land and water, but it counts. So again, this will the cartoon I shared was whereby the SDGs were based on two legs. One was education, and the other is accounting. These have not been touched. They are very much the remnants of the 20th century, and that's the foundation. For this session, we're going to discuss education, the foundation of our system. And fortunately, we have a very powerful, well-rounded panel. We have Mr. Helmi Abu Laish. Could you please join the panel? Mr. Helmi Abu Laish has two hats. He's the CEO of SECAM Group, and he's also the chairman of University of Heliopolis for Sustainable Development. We have Dr. Dina Fattah. She is the chair of economics department at the American University in Cairo. We have Natalie Angondo. She is finance climate youth and part of the team of the climate champion. She's a postgraduate and she's doing her MBA in business. And we have Mr. Moros. Mr. Moros, he is the head of learning and development at Commercial International Bank. So as you see, we have a very well-rounded, virtually, of course, John. John Foster Pedley, Professor Dr. John Foster Pedley. I mean, excuse me. I mean, definitely you should have been present with us. But again, he is the Dean and Director of Henley Business School in South Africa. And he's also chair of Business Association of African, of the Association of African Business Schools that includes 61 business schools in Africa. So I would like to welcome you all, and we'll start our panel discussion. David, it will be great if you can still join us in the discussion. I know it's past midnight, but if you can bear with us, this will be great. So my question...
I'm still here. Yeah.
Thank you, David. My question is to Helmi. Helmi, you are a businessman, a very successful one, but again, you are an educator. You decided to establish Heliopolis School for Sustainable Development. Tell us about your experience, why as a businessman you took this step. Very unusual for a businessman to become an educator.
Very unusual for a businessman to become an educator is a statement which I cannot underwrite 100% because in business, everything is also about education, of course. And without capacity building in your university, in your bank or in SECAM or in any company, no development is possible. So it's all about education. But we are also not an ordinary business. SECAM has been established by my father, Ibrahim Abu Laish, 45 years ago on a series of crazy business ideas. So to go for biodynamic agriculture in the desert, to go for what he calls economy of love, and I can explain it later, but in everything to focus on human development and potential unfolding for the community members, for the community around, for farmers, customers, and so on. This is not the mainstream business we learn neither at AUC, nor at Cairo University, nor at Heliopolis University when you enter for a business degree. So it is this vision of having the people and having development in the center which made SECAM a miracle in the desert and the lighthouse in the desert and things like this. And it's only natural that we have 10% of all the time of our people dedicated to potential unfolding. The 2,000 employees are getting 10% of their time to develop their potential. It's only natural that we have schools from kindergarten to high school and vocational training, and we have this university, Heliopolis University for Sustainable Development. But back to this wonderful presentation of David Orr, I would like to just put in my own, I go 100% along with what he said. I like very much this presentation, and I want to remind us here in the room what he said. He said the reason for climate change are we, each one of us. What he said is you are the reason. Nobody else, nobody in the COP a red zone building is the reason. The reason is how we behave, consume, make business. Each one of us is asking for these products, whether it's buildings, food, mobility, or whatever else, which pulls this system, which is totally destructive for the world. So a system change has to happen in all of our minds that climate change ever will change. In the meantime, we can do quick wins and I don't know, go to renewable energy and go to regenerative agriculture and do things which will slow down the deterioration. But in reality, the only way to deal with it is that we change the behavior of how we do business, how we consume, how we buy today our food when we go out of here, how we buy our clothes, how we buy our cars, how we build our houses, how we build such a pavilion, how we adjust the air condition in this room. All this are the choices which make climate change. And this is not in our agendas. We wait for somebody there to make a decision on coronavirus or I don't know what, and believe that this will stop climate change, and we continue our life as is. This is not going to happen. So system change is coming, and it will come either out of crisis or out of education. So we are for the education part.
Helmi, in 1 minute, why and when did you decide to establish university, Leopolis University for Sustainable Development? Again, this is an unusual decision on part of a businessman. Even if you do capacity building within SECAM, we all do. But establishing university is a decision. This is not common.
Now, the whole SECAM idea, and it was my father who had the idea, I said before, and also the university he established, but the whole idea of SECAM was to be a model for sustainable development, which can be upscaled. And to create this model, the focus was on education, education, education. When you ask my father, what is SECAM, with 2,000 employees, hundreds of farms, I don't know what, he would have told you SECAM is a big school. So for us, education is the focus of everything. And we believe we work for money and we work for I don't know what, and we work for producing potatoes or giving loans in a bank. But in reality, it's about our path to enlightenment and potential unfolding, which only counts. And on this, the university was only the completion of this vision he had from the very beginning, from the first day. It was not an idea which jumped in his mind, but for him it was very important because there, the next generations, and I'm happy that we have Mariam here who is now in CIB and so on, she can tell you this, there, these new ideas, these new ways of thinking can be introduced, this new awareness can be created, which then ultimately will change the world.
Thank you. Now we turn to Dr. John. Dr. John, thank you for joining us. And my question is, do you think 21st global education is fit for purpose?
What purpose? Yes, it's very fit for
SDGs
purpose.
and growth. Yes, I mean, that's a very insightful question. SDGs and our growth to sustain global growth.
Well, it's very fit for purpose to maintain a system of enterprise and activity that maintains continual growth with all the consequences so amazingly presented by Dr. David Orr. And I just have to say that that's one of the presentations that I know will change me. And I hope it, and I know it's going to be one of those seminal presentations that's going to format the rest of my activities in my life around education. So I'm incredibly grateful, David, and thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
And of course, it's not fit for those purposes. It can't be, because it's embedded in a system and a perspective of life that doesn't allow itself to sit outside and see the consequences. We're so programmed into a form of capitalism, that is kind of almost religiously, and you can't deny it, about the growth and about the profit motive as being primal, etc. That it's very hard for us to stand outside. So the system is also subject to accreditation and market forces that dictate it. It's, we have carbon lock-in where it's very difficult to get out of carbon. We also have old capitalism lock-in where it's very difficult to develop models that provoke the sort of change that's going to allow our children to have a decent life. And when my kids, 18 and 16, say, Dad, I don't think we're going to have a life when we're 35 or 40, it absolutely shatters me. So it's not fit for purpose. But I agree with David. We can be optimistic. There's things we can do, but it's not little things. It's really fundamental. The big hope we have is that by making those fundamental changes, our lives will be better, and that the pain and difficulty and the impossibility of making those changes apparent will be worth it. And I think we have to paint that picture of what is coming if we don't do it and what the alternative will be. And so, as educators, we've got a really big job because we have superpower. They say talk is cheap, talking about what we're going to do, but actually talk is really expensive. The wrong sort of talk locks us into models that don't allow us to change. So we have an agenda now as educators, and that's to be very courageous, to step up and start mainstreaming these ideas against what will be massive vested interest, as displayed by David in his description of the number of lobbyists there are from entrenched forces of conservative, like we're seeing at COP at the moment.
John, how would you qualify the gaps in the current global education system, very briefly?
Well, there's an interesting initiative that came out called Business Schools for Climate Change, and they look at about 6 elements that we need to change. And one will be, very briefly, teaching climate change and inequality. That's critical. Another one is teaching climate change and nature, what business needs to do to engage with the natural world, which we are lost from so much of the time. Then another one will be climate change and geopolitics. We have to really talk about that, integrate this into our learning. Climate change and technology, as David said, there are technological, will be great inventions that would help us adapt and mitigate, if not prevent, climate change. And then the 5th one will be climate change and business transformation, and that is fundamental change of what business means, about converting to prosperity rather than being driven by the profit motive. Profit is an essential requirement to continue businesses, but it can never be the purpose of business. The purpose of business is what we're trying to create, the value we're trying to create for people in the world. Profit is what we count to keep ourselves going. If once that is turned around and we think the purpose of business is profit, you are fundamentally lost. Climate change and decarbonization are critical, climate change and risk management, and then climate change and enterprise value. What do we mean by value? How do you account and include those externalities, those costs that aren't included in normal education?
Thank you, John. And I very much appreciate you framing the relationship between profit and value. We cannot sustain our profit unless we create value. And value includes environmental and social and economic factors. Thank you, John. And now we move to Dr. Dina Fattah, Chair of the Economics Department at the American University in Cairo. Dina, I mean, you have listened to David, Helmi, and John, and I would like you to share with us how you view economics discipline, finance discipline globally, and then you zoom on the experience of the AUC and share with us, I mean, whether these disciplines are helpful, they empower students to face the new challenges or not. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for this question. It's actually a very important question, a very important topic that we're talking about today. So we do have some of our young agents of change that are attending with us here today. And if I come to think of the discipline of economics, and if I ask a question to any student and ask them, what are the SDGs or what are the ESGs, they would come and list them. They would tell you what the SDGs are, the 17 goals, the indicators, and so on. But have we actually managed to integrate this within our curricula? Have we managed to focus on the investment in lifelong skills that would actually produce agents of change to these societies? Can we actually produce young generations that are able to implement what they have learned? So getting outside the classes, getting outside the books, and actually experiencing things on the ground is what is going to develop these skills. So the discipline of economics has actually been put to question, especially after the global financial crisis in 2008, and its ability to provide the solution or the right solution. And this is what is expected of all economists. And now the role of education is to actually re-establish this faith in the discipline of economics, or re-establish this faith into education again, to make sure that we are producing these agents of change. We are investing in these lifelong skills for the young generation. This is our only hope to actually have this change coming. I'll zoom into AUC and what we actually do at AUC, and the transformation that we are having in our curriculum, and the focus on producing responsible citizens that are graduates of the School of Business at large or of AUC, and how they develop these skills not only through the classes and through the courses that they're taking, but by stepping outside their comfort zone, stepping outside their courses, and getting to actually experience the practical side of education. This is how we work on implementing these lifelong skills, and therefore we aim to see them as the agents of change in the future.
Dr. Dina, I'm glad you mentioned the extracurricular activities addressed by the American University in Cairo, and the American University is very much ahead of the curve when it comes to this, given its network. It's a very progressive university. However, my question is, having sustainable development or sustainability issues as an extracurricular activities gets us to consider, why aren't they not integrated into the curriculum?
Yes.
They are always, what I would say, the cherry on top of the cake, but they are not into the recipe of the cake. And that's the issue. They are add-ons.
Yes, I totally agree with you on this. And I'll add to it that not only the extracurricular activities, but taking a course about an environment, or having a program that is about sustainability, or having even courses outside your curriculum is not enough. This is not integrating the whole concept of sustainability into the lifelong learning of the students. There has to be an aggressive change to the curricula. There has to be an aggressive change to how students are learning if we really want to have these agents of change for
Right.
sustainability.
Talking about an aggressive change, I think this would lead us to youth. However, I'll get back to Natalie after we listen to Moros. Moros is very active. I mean, other than his being head of learning and development at Commercial International Bank, he has a mission. And I would like to say that Commercial International Bank has been very much focused ever since its establishment back in 1975 on education. It's very much known for its flagship program, a credit course program. But now I think CIB is establishing a new legacy with sustainable finance education. This is where, Moros, I would like you to share with us your experience with finance and economics graduate joining CIB, and what do you have to do to address the persistent and nagging demands of the Sustainable Finance Department at CIB?
Thank you, Dr. Dalia, for the question. Generally speaking, we try to attract the best caliber in the market, graduated from best schools, best universities. But in reality, those graduates, they can comprehend the definitions of the sustainable finance, but how to deploy it in the real life, this is a big challenge. That's why we allocate a huge budget in order to, I would say, rehabilitate them or educate them into the sustainable finance world, along with our existing staff members. And for the second part of the question, how we tackle them, actually, we have a 3-dimension strategy. So the first one is availing a very specialized program for these specific functions, which is very sophisticated functions like risk group, like credit or corporate sales. And of course, these programs has to be very advanced, offered by the top-notch universities. Some of them we use international universities. One of the universities well known of this in Europe. So we are hiring them to offer these programs for our graduates. And the second dimension is spreading the word across the whole population. So we avail a lot of learning materials over our digital platform. So we are all in agreement about the definitions, about the core concepts. And the third definition, or the third dimension, which is really close to my heart, this is my favorite one, is sustaining this education path by embedding the sustainable education in our existing learning tracks, whether like the flagship credit program or SMEs, or even in our yearly training catalog. So we need to make it happen. And now we are moving to a little bit more innovative approach by cracking them down some of the very technical programs into small shots. We call it learning bites. So we will put it in our uploaded in our learning platform, so people would have the flexibility and to go through it on a self-learned base. So it will never affect their workload.
Morris, please, how do you address the gap? You mentioned that you recruit the best educated calibers, but you still have to work on them to get them to deliver on sustainable finance requirements. So, give us an idea. How do you address this gap?
Actually, we had something we initiated last year, and thanks to COVID-19, we availed a new model of summer internship, which is coming up with a theme training that address everyone from first grade to third grade. And we have chosen a very beneficial topic for them. And within this topic, of course, it was a financial inclusion. So within this topic, we availed a good portion of the sustainable finance that is for all undergrad students. So last year, we have covered almost 10,000 undergrad students, and we capitalized on this on this year, 2020, and we capitalized on the subject itself. So we offered entrepreneurship, and again we started to even provide more advanced topic on sustainable finance, and we were stunned with the amount of student applied for this. So more than 12,000 students attended this summer internship. And we covered, I think, most of the governorates. Everyone who applied for this, we accepted it. And one of the initiatives that we are very proud of, that we came out of the box, and we addressed one of the universities in order to establish a specific new scope or new focus within their third year graduate education. And of course, along with the filtration process, not anyone to apply for this new focus, which is sustainable SMEs. So it tackles both sustainable finance and SMEs, and of course, the interrelation between each other. And those undergrad in the third year, they will be availed at the end of the year a summer internship with the professors and with the practitioners who supported them within the third grade. And of course, upon graduation, you will have a final product that really knows the academia, knows the books, what it says, and fully aware of the real hands-on experience that was provided by our professionals. And they had the opportunity to practice this life on these departments during their summer internship. And hopefully that can be enrolled across different universities as well.
I think you endorse Helmi's statement that corporates should focus on education, and John's statement of the power of technology to scale climate change and climate education, sustainable finance. Thank you for it. Now we turn to Natalie Mangondo. Natalie, she is the Finance Youth Climate Champion. And please, I mean, you are the youngest on the panel, but again, you represent African youth and the power of youth to make the change happen. Could you please elaborate? I understand now you are going through your MBA. So please share your experience about your education and your professional mandate, and to what extent your education empowered you or disempowered you. Share your experience, please.
Does this work? Perfect. It sounds good, right? Okay. Perfect. So, my name is Natalie Mangondo. I am from Zimbabwe, and I just want to first off thank Dr. Dalia for being a champion in sustainability and sustainability finance. So thank you for that. Second of all, what I do is I work with the United Nations Climate High Level Champions, and what we do is we engage non-state actors to drive ambitious climate action. So of course we're here at the Climate conference.
Natalie, please raise your
Yeah.
voice, your energy.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
You're the
Oh, I'm a
energy
young
of
person.
youth in
I can
Africa.
raise the
Yes.
energy. But basically, what we do is the conference of the parties focuses on parties, and what we do is engaging non-state actors, and that goes from businesses, investors, civil society, etc. And I think my professional experience, starting from my educational experience, was kind of, it was an add-on, right? Everyone knows as an economist, it was kind of just this add-on experience where you do development economics, and it it was just an add-on, but it needs to be mainstreamed. And that's what the Finance Youth Fellowship with the United Nations Climate Champions team is doing. It's mainstreaming climate change into the professional development of young people, because there are no green jobs. There's no future jobs without green jobs. And I'd like to commend Dr. Dahlia for empowering me so much.
Thank you, Natalie.
She has just really empowered me to take a role and redraft this narrative of where Africa is kind of the victim and make us collaborators. And so I really
No.
would like to commend Dr. Dali. No, she is the most amazing collaborator to be with as a youth in the sustainable finance.
Thank you, Natalie. I think we need to stress this statement. Although Africa is facing crisis, not of its making, the solution should be Africa's making. And this is what this panel is about. It's the power of Africa and African youth and African intellectuals to call for a revolutionizing of global education. And thank you, Natalie. And now back to David. David, what do you think has happened in the educational system, the global educational system, ever since you wrote your book back in 1994? That's about 20 years span.
Well, there's a good bit that's happened, and I think the panel, it's an extraordinary panel, and I appreciate the chance to interact with all of you, even remotely. The thing that strikes me, and Natalie's comments, I think, are particularly relevant here. I think all of us have to own the situation. We can't go back and blame what happened 100 years ago or 50 years ago or 10 years ago. We have to be in the situation now, and they have to move forward from there. One of the things that is very positive, I showed one picture of a building, but all of us are more visual than we are anything else. So 70% of our sensory apparatus connects to our eyes. So we see what we believe what we see. And that's why professions like architecture are so important and urban planning so important, because that's the normal things. So to see a world powered by sunshine is very different than seeing a world powered by fossil fuels. So one of the great things that's happened, I think, in campuses all over the world is the number of solar buildings, the shift from powering universities and colleges from fossil fuels and burning various things to those powered by renewable energy. And so students are seeing a new normal all around them. The urban agricultural systems that have sprung up in all over the world are part of this. We're seeing a new reality begin all around us everywhere, and I take that as a positive. The question for me is, how do we accelerate this? And this is where the role of finance, I think, is very large. To understand where the leverage points are in where we invest and where we spend money and how we budget things and what kind of research and development we do. So economics and finance and business play a huge part in this coming transition. The last thing I would say is, I think in planning for COP28. We need a global movement to begin to unify educational goals and aims so that no student ever graduates without knowing what planet they're on and Earth system science and how we make decisions, how we do the public business that affects those things. And I put it in one slide, the rudiments of ecological design. I think that we know much better than we're acting. And we know how to design buildings that are powered by sunshine. We know how to farm sustainably. Now the goal is to begin to do those things and develop the demands that drive the supply. But I'm optimistic, and what a great panel. You assembled a terrific panel of thoughtful and such articulate people, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, David. It's very comforting that you are optimistic. And then back to Helmi now. Helmi, if you want to accelerate, as David said, the transition, because we are racing with time. I mean, it's not about that we are finally acknowledging that climate is there. The pace and scale by which we move is important. From your perspective, how can we scale and accelerate the transition?
In the field of education, you mean?
Yes.
I mean, I would like to take on two things and give examples from what we do at Heliopolis University for Sustainable Development instead of speaking about the philosophy of it. The one thing which you can do, which can be done in every university in the world, private, NGO, public, is to give to the students a possibility to learn how the world around them really looks. And we are working with the AOC, we are working with other universities, we are working with other schools. And there's a reality that students, whether they are in school or in university, don't know how a cow looks, how compost looks, how the earth looks, how a plant looks, how a tree looks, how it smells, how it feels. They don't believe, they don't know how their food is produced. They really believe it comes from Carrefour or from any other shop, grocery shop. And this is something which we have, this is this awareness shift which we need. Huh? So it starts in the kindergarten, basically. In the business school, it's already too late. If you cannot introduce the concept that we are part of nature, of ecosystems, that we are using resources and so on and so on, as much as you can do, you should do. And there must be a shift. And the shift happens with the academic staff, in the minds of the people, in the curriculums, in the buildings, in everything. Eh? And first of all, we have to approve in our minds, we need to rethink education and better call it lifelong potential unfolding, because education is not linked to schools. Education starts at birth and ends in the grave. And everything else between is education. Eh? And it continues in CIB and in CECAM and everywhere else. So we should never continue to link it to the bachelor or something. The bachelor is one step on a much longer way. So there we need a mind of being ready to rethink question. At Heliopolis University, we have a core program for all faculties, up to 20% of their time, only speaking about sustainable development, going to the farm, making biodynamic agriculture, making compost, going into the desert, going into the village, seeing a village, seeing people living without electricity. This is part of the bachelor of 5 faculties at Heliopolis University for every student, because we have community-based learning, we have space of culture events. Every student is an artist, and every student should unfold this feeling and believe in himself as an artist.
Helmi, who sets your curriculum? How you set it? Because, I mean, this is not the conventional curriculum in universities, right? So who designed it?
I mean, many people joined in designing it from Egypt and from outside Egypt. And it's, by the way, a continuous work in progress. We redesign it every day in the morning when we come together and find a new thing which has to be added. Curriculums are not dead structures. Curriculums are life, part of life. And there is enough flexibility in the academic system, even after approvals of Supreme Council of University and so on, to amend your curricula to real life. So this is the one thing which I wanted to say. And we have to all say, let's move on it, let's make steps, let's exchange, let's share, let's move. But we have to first say, we have to change.
Will.
As long as we come to the university, believe that what I have learned as a professor the last 40 years is what I'm going to continue to tell my students the next 20 with the same PowerPoint presentation, because this is very efficient and climate friendly, then we have a problem. Okay, now move to the other thing, applied research. Students in schools, in universities must learn critical thinking and must research. And the most important research at Heliopolis University at the moment is totally in line with David Orr's true cost accounting. Now, who in his accounting career at AUC, Cairo University, or like myself abroad, has ever learned the term true cost accounting? And without true cost accounting, we have no idea what the real cost is. Everyone in the room, when I ask him, why do you don't buy organic products? In Germany, 8% buy organic products, in Egypt, 0.8%. It's too expensive. And then you make true cost accounting, and it's much cheaper when you consider the externalized cost. So this is a shift in mind. Huh? What is the real cost of my food? What do I pay? What I don't pay? And true cost means what? True cost means that somebody is really paying, next generation, or I, in another bill, cleaning my water, or I don't know what. So it's true cost. It's not a joke. Huh? So we have to have this concept applied to understand what we really pay. But this made us at Heliopolis University, and I have colleagues here, think how to monetize this now for our farmers. And now we have developed a model, which we announced here at the COP. We worked with 2,000 farmers for 2 years, and we basically told them, go from conventional farming to biodynamic farming, okay? Which is very nice. And then you sell the biodynamic product at conventional price so that everyone can buy it in your village, not in Carrefour. Very nice. And then you get agricultural carbon credits because guess what? Through cost accounting, average emissions per Faden acre in Egypt are 5 tons, okay? Our biodynamic farmers sequester 20 tons. Can you imagine the difference? -5 plus 20. Sequester, carbon removal. So now we have to honor these climate heroes, which are smallholder farmers in Egypt, give them money for their agricultural carbon credits, the big discussion out there, and then they have a better income than you going to CIB every day in the morning. Fantastic.
Yeah,
Climate heroes, wealthy,
Will shift career.
and living a nice
Yeah, yeah.
life. So now our climate heroes, these 2,000 farmers, have a better income, can educate their kids, can keep them going to school and university, sell biodynamic products, and sequester carbon. Win, win, win. Huh? And
Yeah.
it's now going to be upscaled to 40,000, hopefully to the whole world. This is true cost accounting and a new thinking about economy. Huh? But this can be done in the waste management. This can be done in the health system. This can be done everywhere. We need innovative new ideas with true cost accounting, do the right thing.
Helmi, this warrants another panel, the true cost accounting, and that it is profitable. There is a business case. When we account for the environment and society, it doesn't mean that it's lost. It means that we are sensitive. So talking about dynamism in revising curriculum, now Dr. Dina, briefly, tell us how can this be done at universities level? I mean, this is a private university, AUC, Cairo University, I mean, African universities. So now to you and then to John, how do you think we can revise academic curriculum to make sure that sustainability is integrated?
I think the story starts with the belief in the change. So everyone has to come along in believing the change has to happen and that this change would require stepping out of your comfort zone. So, but educators need to believe that. It's not the ones who are actually teaching. I do believe in it, but you have to convince the whole system to believe in it and make sure that the change in the curriculum is not what you're teaching. It's not the book that you're assigning or the readings that you're assigning. As Mr. Helmi is saying, you need to take them outside. You need to have them see things in reality and get educated in a different way. So we have to believe that education is a continuous improvement. We always have to revise what we're giving inside the classes. It is not that I put a curriculum, I assigned readings or courses or assessments, and I have to stick to it for 5 or 10 years. It can be revised during the same semester. It can be revised every day. We need to make sure the students are always exposed to what is new and what is happening in the world. for so long, or actually, economics is all about GDP, and GDP is all about consumption, investment, government spending, and net export, and that's it. It's like I always tell my students, it's like a song that you memorize from the day you start teaching, learning economics. But the change actually has to come from very early on. How are we accounting for environmental changes? How are we accounting for the society? How are we accounting for all the discussions that are taking place nowadays, the SDGs, the ESGs, and so on? How are the happiness? How are we taking this into consideration when we're actually measuring GDP? So we have to step out of this very strict mode of teaching and what economics has always been about, and try to be a bit more revolutionary in our curricula and teach the students beyond what has traditionally been there in books, and explore what other countries have and what other curricula has. And this is where the change is going to come, and everyone has to believe in it.
Thank you, Dina. John, what's your view? I mean, you are chair of African Business School Association that includes 61 business schools in Africa.
I think there's two elements to this. One, you can do change from inside the system by playing around with syllabi and making a difference. That's reasonably effective. The other thing is to step back out of this and look at the consequence, look at the result. Start with the end in mind. We have to change a dial, and the dial is the temperature of the planet, the loss, the damage to the environment, the future for our children. We have to think, what are we doing that's actually going to change the dial? And then reverse engineer from that. I mean, you can't teach something unless you are that thing. You know, people don't just listen to the words. How you model what you are being. And that's why David's description of the building is so important. We have to change ourselves to really understand this and change our practices and emulate it, because a lot of these understandings are caught, not taught. The second thing is that us knowing it is only part of it. We have to create a movement. And movements are typically activist things. We don't teach how to generate large movements, particularly ones that might change the structure of the society we live in. Business schools and universities are often extremely conservative, serving the model they're in. So we've got to understand how you get to people to change the understandings. David mentioned the importance of graphics. I think we need to learn how to explain things simple enough for clever people, graphic descriptions, graphic novels, using all the capabilities of the advertising industry, the media industry, the written world, the creative world, bring those in to express and understand this. And the third thing is, you can't really engage with nature unless you have a feel for nature. And there's so much of our lives that take us away from that. We need to bring people in. So I love the idea of what Heliopolis is doing, touching the soil. If you read George Monbiot's new book, Regenesis, he's got an absolutely extraordinary chapter on soil structures and how this inner world of this thin layer around the planet is so unbelievably complex and rich. And we're hardly even teaching about that. Even current agricultural methods, even progressive organic methods are not necessarily understanding it. And the damage that's caused by free-range organic agriculture is massive in terms of agriculture and other runoff and damage to the rivers. We don't understand these systems. So the final thing we can do is teach people to think in systems, the unintended consequences, to give them the imagination to step out. We teach rationality. We also need to teach imagination and empathy, to imagine what it could be, to visualize. And these are all teachable things that don't sit inside our syllabus or they're in art schools. No more. They have to come they have to represent the wealth of our brains, and this is what we need to teach.
Thank you, John. Now, Moros, please, from your perspective, you represent corporate along with Helmi on this panel. What could be done on your part to accelerate the shift?
Oh, actually, I think the Mother Nature will always provide us with free meal, but only if we understand and appreciate the cost of the meal's ingredients. So I believe nowadays sustainable finance is not a luxury anymore. It has to be embedded within our DNA education system, and not necessarily within the high school or even university stage. It has to start from early beginning, and it has to start with a practical, and I will echo Dr. John in his statement, we have to start with the end in mind. So we have to present a case, what if we didn't do this? So it's not a luxury anymore.
Thank you. Natalie? So, I mean, we've been talking about activism and the power of African youth to engage global students. Uh, what do you think you and your peers in Africa could be doing to accelerate the transition?
Yes, so John Foster said, you can't see that thing unless you are that thing. And right now, everyone in the room physically and everyone virtually, I am that thing. I come from one of the most vulnerable, climate vulnerable countries, and you can't advocate for that thing unless you're educated about that thing. And it really needs to be implemented. And so it starts in, I'm going to give you the four ABCs because we're at an education panel. But A, it starts with Africa. Africa is an innovator. We're not just climate vulnerable, we are climate innovators. B, climate in Africa has ambition, and we need to hold our governments to account to ensure that they are ambitious in their climate pledges. C, action, and that's where I work, focusing on the private sector. We can't do this alone. We need to move out of our silos and take concrete action. And then D, we really need to be accountable to each other. So young people have always been, the voice of reason, the voice of accountability. But all of us, whether we're in the private sector, the public sector, the intergovernmental sector, we need to really hold each other accountable.
Thank you, Natalie. I think you bravely mentioned the power of Africa to enact the change, and true, this panel has what it takes to enact the change and revolutionize education on a global level. We have youth. Africa has 60% youth, and that's a wealth. I mean, this is not available for other continents. That's the real power of Africa. And we have progressive continents, and we have very well-rounded, seasoned business schools. And I think we have what it takes to change the narrative of global education. And as we aspire that COP27 Sharm el-Sheikh succeeds in negotiations to unlock and mobilize funds for developing countries, I think a parallel track, an alliance between finance, corporate, and most importantly, youth, could be enacted to take the helm and address climate challenges and take them into opportunities. And I think I'm very glad to announce for you that CIB, Commercial International Bank of Egypt, is taking the first initiative, and part of its strategic direction is to establish a sustainable finance academy to serve African financial institutions. And that's the aspired outcome of this panel. And I think starting with this, of course, we'll be allying with African schools, with the Egyptian universities. I mean, African universities, African youth. I think we should lobby, because unless we address the foundation of our system, the system transition will never take place. And it will be another COP and another COP and another COP, and we'll go on negotiating, negotiating, negotiating. The power of change lies in African youth and the global youth. You need to connect with youth worldwide, and you need to address system imbalance. We are going to a system crisis, and it's all about education. Thank you so much for being with us, and we're looking forward to change it. Thank you. I would like to thank the panelists. David, I mean, you go on inspiring, although you are in San Francisco, but your mission and message resonated in Africa. And
Well, thank you so
John,
much.
you have a mission with 61 universities within your league. Natalie, you represent a great power in the African youth, progressive businessmen and educators, progressive faculty, and progressive corporate executives. We have what it takes. What it takes is corporate civil society movement. It's the bottom up approach. With all our appreciation for the top down and politics, it's very tedious for our fellows there in the blue zone trying to agree on things, but we don't have the luxury of time. We are racing with time. We could be there when it's too late. I mean, the incremental changes COP over COP are never enough to nail it. Thank you so much, and look forward to celebrate by COP28. The COP27 had this legacy of changing education. Thank you.